Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Anna Mathai, and I'm here with my colleague Gail Wallace. The League of Women Voters is a grassroots nonpartisan organization of women and men. Nonpartisan means we never support or oppose political parties or candidates. The League has two branches. In voter service and education, we work to present complete information and arguments on all sides of the issue. The League also has an action and advocacy branch where we do take positions and we may advocate for legislation or ballot measures. We are here today representing the voter education branch. Our presentation will run about 50 minutes or so, and we'll take questions right after that. So, something about how to evaluate measures. You want to know what the measure does and why. What does it cost? How will it be paid for? Is it well written, or is it likely to cause more problems than it solves? Follow the money to really find out who's behind it. And hopefully with that, you will come to which side do you agree with. Do you support or do you oppose? Voting is not a test, so it's okay to leave blanks. Vote for what is clear and important to you. So if there's something that you're not clear about, you can skip it, but don't not vote because there's something that you're not clear about. So we have 10 California propositions on the ballot and 3 Oakland City ones, and we're going to talk through all of them today. So the propositions. So the state ballot propositions can make new laws, they can change existing laws, or they can change the California Constitution. A proposition passes and becomes law if it receives more than 50% yes votes. Propositions get on the ballot in 2 ways. Either the state lawmakers, that is the California legislature, can put it on the ballot with a 2/3 vote. And those are all the single-digit propositions that you see. That's 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Or an initiative is a change proposed by citizens or special interest groups who collect enough voter signatures to get an issue on the ballot. See, all the double-digit ones you see here, 32 through 36, are all initiatives. And now I'll turn this over to Gail.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start us off talking about 3 bond-related measures. So I want to begin by explaining or reminding you what a bond is. A bond is a means for a government entity to finance long-term projects by borrowing money that is paid off over a considerable period of time. The kind of big projects that are funded by government bonds are the building of schools, construction of bridges, and the development of other types of infrastructure. Governments sell these bonds to investors, and then they repay the investors over decades, both the principal and the interest. General obligation bonds issued by the state are paid back from the general fund. So that's the big backdrop. Let's get on to our first bond measure, which is Proposition 2. Proposition 2 is a state school bond measure. As a bit of background, let me inform you that there's about 10,000 public schools in California and approximately 115 community colleges. Both the state and local school districts share the costs of repairing and upgrading these schools or building new ones should the need arise. And both the state and the local school districts cover their share of the cost by issuing bonds. So over time, both the state and local districts seek voter approval to take on bond debt, which is why you see recurring bond measures, both state and local, on your ballots. Proposition 2, the one at issue, is a state bond, and it is asking you to allow California to issue $10 billion in bonds. If it passes, the money obtained by selling those bonds over time will be distributed as matching funds to local school districts who apply for grants. A little bit of history. The last school facilities bond measure was approved 8 years ago in 2016 for $9 billion. So most of that money has been committed to projects as matching funds. 4 years later, in 2020, a bond measure narrowly failed, which is an unusual thing. It was the first time a state school bond failed to pass in several decades. Subsequent to the failure of that bond in the following year, 2021, a report was issued finding that nearly 40% of students attending schools are attending schools that do not meet the minimum standards for our facilities. 15% of those children are attending schools with extreme deficiencies such as water damage, power failures, and structural damage. This bond would have the state borrow $8.5 billion for the public schools and $1.5 billion for community colleges. Next slide, please. What's the fiscal effect? Remember, we said that the state is going to pay back principal and interest on these bonds over a number of years. In this case, it will be paid out of the general fund. The cost will be approximately $500 million per year for 35 years. Next slide, please. This is the first time you're going to see one of the slides that we call the money slide. There'll be one on every issue that we talk about because, as Anna mentioned to you, it's important to follow the money because it'll tell you who's interested in this and who is likely to benefit. I'm not going to comment too much on these money slides. I'm just going to give you a moment to look at them and take in the information. Next slide, please. Supporters of Proposition 2 say that it's crucial to fund basic school repairs in order to meet the safety standards and support our students. They also point out that this legislation requires that funding projects be approved with local districts if those local districts have sought community input in making their requests. And they also want you to know that this measure includes special support for small school districts and those in disadvantaged communities who have historically had more difficulty applying for these grants. Opponents say the school facility upgrades should be funded out of our general fund, not via bonds. They claim that California has over $109 billion in outstanding and unused bonds, and that we should be prioritizing educational funding, that is instructional funding, over other expenditures such as these bonds on infrastructure. Next slide, please. So if you vote yes on Proposition 2, you are authorizing the state to issue these bonds and to generate these funds, which will provide matching funds to local school districts. If you vote no, you are withholding that authorization. Okay, we're going to move on to Proposition 4, and I'm just pointing out, since we're not in possession of our ballots yet, that we are going slightly out of order here in order to keep the bond-related measures together. So we're on to Proposition 4, which is also seeking voter approval for the state of California to take on bond debt. Also $10 billion. This money would be spent to improve water supply and water quality, as well as storm management systems and water restoration projects for lakes and rivers. Additionally, money would fund wildfire prevention, responses to sea level rise, and mitigation of other environmental problems associated with climate change. You can see the breakout of the proposed spending on the slide. We have a category entitled Other, and that includes 1.2 for coastal resilience, another 1.2 for biodiversity protection, and 2.5 for clean air parks, heat mitigation, and agriculture, a broad range of environmental issues. 40% of the bond proceeds will be allocated to low-income communities or those most impacted by disasters or climate change. Some of this money will replace funds that were recently cut from California's budget due to the current deficit. Next slide, please. These bonds also will be paid back over decades, in this case 40 years, and the projected bond cost is $400 million a year that would be paid out of the state's general fund. However, the bonds would fund projects that would also reduce future risk and costs from the damage done by environmental disasters. Next slide, the money slide. Again, I'll give you a moment. Next slide, please. Supporters say that the threat from climate change is urgent and growing, and that we need now to act now proactively to increase our resilience. They further argue that this money would allow us to make efficient and sensible investments in proven solutions. Those who oppose the bond measure say that clean drinking water and wildfire prevention are necessary, but they should be funded from the state budget, the general fund, as opposed to through bonds. The second thing they say is that they worry that the funding will be invested in unproven technologies that have no track record of success. Next slide, please. So yes, if you vote yes on this measure, then you are again authorizing the state to issue bonds in this amount for these purposes. And if you vote no, you are withholding that authorization. And the final bond-related measure is one that is not a bond in and of itself. So we're shifting gears a little bit. We're on Proposition 5. And this is a measure about local bonds, not state bonds. It's about the level of voter support that will be necessary for a bond to pass. So, a little background. Bonds issued by the state, like the two that we've just discussed, require a simple majority to pass. And these bonds are paid out of the state's general fund. On the other hand, you have the local bonds issued by cities and counties that require a 2/3 vote to pass. Proposition 5 would lower the voting threshold for these local bonds to 55% instead of the 67% that is associated with the 2/3 requirement. Local bonds are repaid from property taxes. Local bonds can be used to fund affordable housing for low and middle class or pay for infrastructure such as roads, water, and fire protection. So the passage of Proposition 5 will likely have no effect on the state budget since it's all about local bond financing. The effect that it could have on the local level depends upon local decisions on whether or not to issue bonds. It could increase local borrowing by making it easier to obtain voter approval for the projects. And it could therefore result in more money spent on local housing supply or infrastructure improvements. Next slide, please. Again, our money slide. Give you a moment. So next slide, please. Supporters say changing this requirement for passage would give local voters more autonomy to address local needs. And it would help build more housing that's badly needed. Opponents contend that this would push infrastructure costs onto local government and thereby increase their debt. And they say, additionally, that we already have a very high cost of living, and Proposition 5 would make everything more expensive. Next slide, please. If you vote yes for this, then the requirement for passage of local bond measures would be 55%, changed from the current 67%. If you vote no and the measure does not pass, then it would remain where it is and not change. I'm going to hand things back to Anna for the next 3 propositions.
Great. Thanks, Gail. All right. So Proposition 3 is about marriage equality. So in 2008, Proposition 8 added language to the California Constitution that says marriage is between a man and a woman. Prop 8 was later overturned by a federal court. It was ruled unconstitutional under our 14th Amendment, and so same-sex marriage has been allowed in California for more than 10 years. Also in 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court allowed same-sex marriage throughout the U.S. So what's the effect of this proposition? If it passes, it doesn't change who can marry. It repeals Prop 8, and it amends the California Constitution to explicitly include the right to marry as a fundamental right. So what it's doing is it's future-proofing, it's protecting marriage from potential changes in the U.S. courts. So in terms of the dollars for and against, we've got a total about $4 million for, 0 against, and I'll give you a minute here. So supporters say that this proposition would protect against future attempts to restrict marriage rights for same-sex or interracial couples. And supporters say this would align the state constitution with current law, and it would reaffirm the freedom to marry as a fundamental right. Opponents say, as same-sex marriage is already legal, this amendment is fixing a non-existent problem. And they claim this eliminates all rules for marriage, opening the door to child marriage, incest, and polygamy. So to summarize this, what a yes vote means is that the California Constitution will explicitly include the right to marry as a fundamental right, and a no vote is a California Constitution will not be changed. Prop 6 is all about forced labor in prisons. So the California Constitution bans forced labor, except as a punishment for crime. People in California prisons are required to work for minimal pay. So what this proposition would do is it would ban forced labor as a punishment for crime. So it would protect people in prison from being disciplined for refusing a work assignment. It does allow voluntary work and credits or privileges for that work. Working could benefit the inmate to potentially reduce sentences. It could also change current reimbursement for work from less than $1 to minimum wage. However, this proposition does not require that the Department of Corrections does not mandate the Department of Corrections to pay minimum wage. So any potential increase or decrease in the state and criminal costs likely would not exceed on the order of a few tens of millions of dollars annually. It's a little bit hard to estimate. So in terms of the money slide, not as much as some of the others we've seen, but give you again a minute to look over this. So supporters say that this proposition would restore human dignity by ending forced labor, which is essentially a modern-day version of slavery. And it would support rehabilitation by allowing people in prison to choose their work assignments and so improve public safety overall. There were no arguments submitted against Prop 6. So in summary, you are voting yes if you support banning forced labor in prisons, and you are voting no, or you vote no to support keeping the current exceptions to forced labor. So those were the 5 propositions that were put on the ballot by the state legislature, and now we're going to move to the next 5 that were initiatives. So with the initiatives, it's even more important to look at, the dollars and really look at the motivations of who's put them on the ballot. So the first one is Prop 32, which is around the minimum wage and raising the minimum wage for the state of California. So currently, the state minimum wage is $16. However, some workers have a higher minimum wage. Specifically, it's $20 for fast food workers and up to $25 for healthcare workers. There's kind of a scale there. Cities and counties can also have their own different minimum wages. So Oakland's minimum wage currently is $16.50. So what the measure would do is it would raise the minimum wage to $18 starting next year for businesses with 26 or more workers. And it would raise the minimum wage to $17 for employers with 25 or fewer employees next year, and then $18 the following year. So give smaller businesses more of a chance to catch up. And then any cost of living adjustments would start a couple of years after that, would start in 2027. So in terms of the fiscal effects, this is from the Legislative Analyst's Office. The proposition would probably raise state and local costs in some ways and then decrease them in other ways. So there would be higher government costs to pay for workers, either employees or contractors. But conversely, there would probably be savings from lower enrollment in Medi-Cal and other social programs like CalFresh. So in terms of the dollar slide, significantly more for $10 million. So supporters say that higher wages can improve the standard of living for millions of workers, and increased customer spending could also help boost the economy. So opponents say that smaller businesses are more likely to suffer from increased operating costs, and this could result in layoffs of workers or raise prices for everyone. And there's also the potential for reduced business profits, which would reduce the overall taxes collected. So a yes vote, you are voting to raise the minimum wage in California to $18, and your no vote means you want to keep the minimum wage as it is right now. And I'm going to hand this back to Gail again.
And a reminder, as we're in these initiatives, we're in the weeds, okay? They take us to more difficult questions, so expect to be confused. This one is about rent control, Prop 33. Rent control limits how much landlords can raise the rent each year. Many local cities, like Oakland, San Francisco, Berkeley, have some rent control. However, that control is limited at the local level by a state law known as Costa-Hawkins. And it limits local rules in three ways. It says that cities cannot impose rent control on single-family homes. It also says cities cannot impose rent control on newer apartments built after 1995. And furthermore, there can be no rent control on the rates that are charged to new tenants when you're doing a change of tenancy, an old tenant moving out, a new tenant moving in. So those are the current restrictions on state law. What is proposed here in Prop 33 is to repeal the state law and entirely move the authority over rent control from the state to local governments. If it passes, local governments will determine the rules for rent control in their jurisdiction without any state-imposed limitations. So, fiscal effect. This is one of those ones that it's tough to prognosticate because we don't know what cities and counties would do in terms of whether they'd passed rent control laws and what those would be, and how landlords would respond to any laws that were passed. It's likely that it would reduce the money from property taxes. Then this decrease could be in the tens of millions of dollars per year. Also, in terms of on the expenditure side, cities and counties will need to spend money to enforce whatever laws are enacted at the local level. So this is the money slide. And I am going to speak a little bit on this money slide because it's going to be relevant to our next ballot measure as well. I want you to see that as the proponent of this measure for rent control, you have the AIDS Healthcare Foundation spending hundreds of millions to put this on the ballot. And this is essentially the third time that the AIDS Foundation has put this measure on the ballot. The prior times were 2018 and 2020. So you're not hallucinating and thinking that you've already thought about this before. Okay? As the opponents here, you have the California Association of Realtors, the Apartment Association, and the National Association of Realtors. The supporters say that Proposition 33 will allow local government to protect renters, and that local voters and cities should be able to decide if, when, and how to regulate rents. Those opposed say that Proposition 33 could actually increase housing costs and block new affordable housing from being built, and that could worsen the housing crisis. They also say that Proposition 33 could reduce home values. If you vote yes for this, you are voting for the repeal of the state law known as Costa-Hawkins and returning rent control to local control without any state input. If you vote no, Costa-Hawkins remains in effect with the three limitations on local regulations. Okay, this is Proposition 34. And it's connected with 33. I hope I'll be able to explain why. It purports to be about healthcare expenditures, but most observers and commentators agree that it's about rent control. That's why the California Apartment Association is the largest investor in the measure, and the AIDS Healthcare Foundation is spending the greatest amount in opposition. So you get a flip of what you see in the prior measure. The background here is that there is a federal law that allows healthcare providers that serve low-income people to buy prescription drugs at a discount, sell them at retail prices, and use the profits to expand their services. The AIDS Healthcare Foundation participates in this program and uses its profits from the drug discount program to bring rent control propositions to the ballot. And their opponents want to hamper their ability to do this. So this measure is written specifically so that an organization that has spent more than $100 million in 10 years on anything besides patient care and has operated multifamily housing reported to have at least 500 high-severity health and safety violations, would then be required to spend 98% of its profits from the federal drug law on direct patient care. So in sum, this proposition would codify the federal program into state law and create new rules that at the moment apply principally to the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, which would have to spend at least 98% of its net revenue from the federal program on direct patient care. The fiscal effect is that you will have increased state costs to enforce the new rules. Here's your money slide, and we've already taken a dive into this, but you can see it's a bit of a reversal of the slide for the rent control measure. Supporters say that any profits from drug discount programs should be spent on health care, and that the state could then negotiate lower Medi-Cal prescription drug prices. Opponents say that bringing this measure is an abuse of the initiative process meant to target one healthcare provider that supports rent control, and that federal law currently allows profits from drug discounts to support any nonprofit mission of healthcare providers. Next slide, please. So if you vote yes, this restriction on the organizations described in those very particular terms I said would go into effect, and they would have to spend 98% of their profits on direct patient care. And if you vote no, and that's the way it goes, then things remain as they are. So this is another one that takes us into the weeds of policy. So let me give you a bit of background. The state of California charges healthcare plans, think Kaiser and Blue Cross, charges these plans a tax that's called the Managed Care Organizations Tax. It's not a permanent tax, but it's periodically reapproved, and it currently is set to expire in 2026 unless it's renewed. The federal government matches these tax dollars dollar for dollar. Currently told, this process generates $7 to $8 billion a year, which goes into the state of California's treasury and is used to support Medi-Cal. Right now, the legislature has discretion to use the money, not unbridled discretion, but some discretion, and it is used to fund primary and specialty care, emergency services, family planning, mental health, and prescription drugs, as well as community health workers, private duty nurses, and continuous Medi-Cal coverage for eligible children up to the age of 5. So what would change if we voted yes for this? It would make the now renewed tax a permanent tax, pending federal approval. But more importantly, it would eliminate the discretion that is now available and require that the tax money be spent on primary and specialty care, emergency services, family planning, mental health, and prescription drugs. The other spending on community-based services and the coverage for younger children would not be authorized. The measure would also restrict the legislature's current discretion to supplement existing Medi-Cal funding with this income when we have a lean budget year. The fiscal effect, it would increase Medi-Cal funding and also increase state costs for expanding services, particularly in those situations where it would develop that we got fewer federal matching dollars. Here's your money slide. And so you see here the organizations who are for this are the ones who will be receiving funds for their providers, who will be making available the services that will continue to be funded. The opposition, you would note Governor Newsom is based more on the idea that this is earmarking and reducing the legislative and gubernatorial discretion in terms of allocating funds. Supporters say this will protect and expand access to health care for millions of Californians, including children, low-income families, seniors, and people with disabilities. Opponents say, although there's no organized opposition, I should say Governor Newsom and policy experts are arguing that earmarking how the tax revenue is spent makes it difficult to balance the state budget, and that expanding Medi-Cal services could create additional costs for the state. So voting yes, you create a situation where this shared tax is made permanent. And more importantly, you act in favor of having the discretion be limited in the ways that we've described. Voting no leaves the situation as it is now. Back to Anna.
So we are down to our last state measure. Hurrah for that. All right, Prop 36. This is about increased crime penalties. So in 2014, Prop 47, that's a proposition we passed, turned nonviolent crimes like drug possession and shoplifting into misdemeanors. And misdemeanors are a much less serious crime than a felony. And turned them into misdemeanors unless the person had prior convictions for serious crimes. So the prison population has decreased, and the money saved has been redirected into social programs. More recently, we've had an increase in organized retail theft and smash and grab robberies that I think we're all familiar with. So the effect of this proposition would be to reclassify the theft of items less than $950 from misdemeanors back to felonies if the suspect has 2 or more past convictions for certain thefts. The second effect would be to add fentanyl to the list of hard drugs, which would increase the penalties for its use or its sale. And the third effect would be to create a new class of crime called the treatment mandated felony, which gives an offender the option to participate in drug and mental treatment. And so if an offender doesn't contest the charges, participates in this drug treatment, then they would escape going to prison. However, if they don't finish the treatment, they could still face up to 3 years in prison. The fiscal effects are a little hard to quantify, but overall, both state and local criminal justice costs could arise from an increase in prison populations and or an increase in the court workload. Proposition 36, this proposition would also reduce the state savings that were created by Prop 47, and those savings are currently used for mental health and drug treatment, for school programs and victim services. If we look at our money slide, we have about 11 million for, 12 million for, and about 3 million against. A lot of retailers in support, and I'll just give you a minute or so to look over the supporters and opponents. So the supporters say tougher laws against retail thefts will protect businesses in every community, and so we really need this proposition. And they also claim this would reduce crime and substance abuse by mandating the treatment for felony drug offenders. Opponents say this would make California less safe by reducing funding for crime prevention, treatment, rehabilitation, and services for crime victims, and it would cost taxpayers billions more to imprison more people without reducing crimes. So what a yes vote is, you want to increase the penalties on some crimes, and if you vote no, you are voting to keep the current penalties that are enforced, that are in the law. Now we go on to the next 3, which are the Oakland ballot measures. And similar to the state, how ballot measures in Oakland get on our ballot is either via the city council, and the city council has put 2 measures, which are measures M, M, and O on the ballot. Citizens or groups can also place an initiative on the ballot, and that is our third measure, Measure NN. So the first measure, Measure MM, is around wildfire prevention. So the Oakland Hills require active management of high wildfire risks, and voters in the Hills have previously voted to fund wildfire prevention efforts. This year, 2024, Oakland created a 10-year vegetation management plan to better manage the fire risk in the hills. So what this measure is a special tax for 20 years on owners of properties within the wildfire prevention zone. It's a high-risk fire zone as defined by the California Department of Forestry and Fire Prevention. And the money would go to implementing the city's vegetation management plan around managing dead and dying trees, managing evacuation routes, and so on. This may be a little hard to see, but we have this also on our website. So the outline in red on the right is really the wildfire prevention zone. So it sort of follows Highway 13 a little bit below and a fair amount above, and then down where 13 joins 580, again a little bit below 580, and then above, down to about where the zoo is. So again, just to emphasize that only voters who live or who have property in the wildfire prevention zone will see this measure on your ballot. If you don't live within the zone, you are not going to see this measure at all. And what the measure would do is it would impose a parcel tax of $99 for single family dwellings, $65 for each unit in residential properties, and there's corresponding numbers for commercial properties. This would be for 20 years. And there would be some exemptions for low-income seniors, people who live in affordable housing, as a few exemptions apply. And this would raise about $2.7 million in the first year and, sort of proportionately amounts after that. We don't quite have the equivalent of a money chart because we don't typically see a lot of money for local measures. So what we've done is there is a little bit of money for it. So we've got the money up there. And then the others in bold, we have the signatories for the measure. So those are the names that you see there. And again, I'll just give you a few seconds to look over that. So supporters say that the most effective way to prevent forest fires is preventative. And we need the money to fund the implementation of Oakland's comprehensive vegetation management plan, which is what this measure would fund. Opponents totally agree that wildfire prevention is an essential service. However, they want it to be funded out of the city's general fund. And they are also unhappy with the oversight because they say it's inadequate because an audit by the city auditor is optional in the measure. So in summary, a yes vote means you are supporting a special tax for wildfire prevention, and a no vote, you oppose this special tax. Measure NN. So this is all about violence prevention and funding for police and fire. So the background here is since 2019, under Measure Z, Oakland has collected both property and parking lot taxes to fund violence prevention and emergency response programs. So that funds the Oakland part of the Oakland Police Department, the Department of Violence Prevention, and the Oakland Fire Department. So this raises about $30 million a year, but this Measure Z is going to expire at the end of 2024. So Measure NN would continue and increase the current parcel and parking lot taxes for 9 more years. The revenues would be spent on reducing homicides, robberies, carjackings, and other violence. It would be used to improve 911 emergency response rates and reduce human trafficking. But 60% of the money would go to OPD, the police, 40% to Department of Violence Prevention, and the Department of Violence Prevention would be required to use 75% of that money for providing grants to community-based organizations, and $3 million off the top would go to the fire department. So the fiscal effects, this would raise the parcel tax on single-family units from $133 to about $198. Multi-unit residences would go from about $91 to $132 per unit. And parking lot taxes on commercial lots would increase from 8.5% to 10%. There are annual increases permitted. And again, we've got exemptions for seniors with low incomes, other people with low incomes, and people who live in affordable housing projects. The auditor estimates that the revenue from this measure would be about $47 million a year. Again, we do have a little bit actually more than we typically do on the money slide, again, with the number of businesses, 640K towards the measure and none against the measure. So supporters say that this would enhance public safety by funding critical violence prevention programs. It would pay for police and firefighters that Oakland needs, provide resources to improve 911. And the opponents say, Measure Z taxes have not prevented violence, so why should the measure be extended? And they also say that not enough of Measure NN funds are directly supporting the hiring of police officers. So in summary, a yes vote, you support extending and increasing this parcel tax for 9 more years. And a no vote, you oppose extending this parcel tax. Our last measure, Measure 00, is around the Public Ethics Commission. So some background here. In 1996, Oakland voters approved the Public Ethics Commission, which ensures compliance with Oakland's government ethics, campaign finance, transparency, and lobbyist registration laws. So the Public Ethics Commission is staffed by 7 volunteer commissioners and a small department of city staff members. In 2014, the commission was given a little bit more authority, additional authority, and its staffing was increased. However, now in 2024, the investigative workload has increased significantly to exceed its staffing capacity, and things are bad to the extent that half of the commission's investigative workload is on hold. So the changes would update the governance and quorum rules, staffing classifications to streamline the overall commission operation. It would add 1 ethics investigator, and it would lower the maximum gift limit to $50 that anyone can give an elected city office holder, a candidate, or a member of their immediate family. The fiscal effects, there's a little bit of up and down here, but on the order of $250,000 to $300,000. Most of the costs are to hire an additional ethics investigator. That's the bulk of the cost, about $242,000. And then the flexibility of classification could result in some savings, or it could result in increasing costs. So those possibly could balance each other. So again, in terms of there's no money for or against it, but you can see these are again the signatories for the measure. Supporters say in order to be effective, the commission must have the resources to actually manage its workload. And you really want to limit gifts from lobbyists to public officials and candidates. That's really a good thing to do. Opponents say voters should not approve any additional funding for the Public Ethics Commission because it's not always done its job of holding public officials accountable or of ensuring that government processes are transparent. So again, a yes vote means you approve the charter amendments for the for the Public Ethics Commission, and a no vote, if you vote no, you're opposing charter amendments to the Public Ethics Commission. And now I'm going to turn it over to Gail.
Take a breath. You've done well. So we have a few slides we just want to run through relatively quickly about some resources and other dimensions of the upcoming election, but also please be thinking about questions that you'd like to pose. I'm sure you have some. These are complicated matters. So first of all, we want you to know that on our website, we have a wealth of resources. This has been a presentation on the ballot measures, but of course you have many choices with respect to the candidates who are running. Candidate forums covering many of the races are up on our website already, and we will finish with those forums that happened today by getting them up on the website probably early next week. So you have a resource there to, at your leisure, view the recordings and assess what the various candidates promise to do. Next slide, please. Additionally, on your ballot, besides the ballot measures, besides the candidates, we have 2 recall propositions. This is unusual, all right? So first, the Oakland voters will decide whether or not to recall Mayor Sheng Tao. If you vote yes on the recall, you are voting that the mayor should be removed from office now. If you vote no, you are voting that she should be allowed to finish her term, which lasts until January 2027. The recall requires over 50% yes votes to pass. If it does pass, the president of the city council will take over as temporary mayor. The current president is Nikki Fortunato Boss, who is the city council member for District 2. Then we would have a special election sometime in March or April in which Oaklanders would choose a new mayor, and the new mayor's term would last until January 2027. That's the first recall. Second recall, Alameda County voters, including we Oaklanders, will also decide whether to recall the district attorney, Pamela Price. If this recall passes, same 50% criterion, the Alameda County Board of Supervisors would appoint a new district attorney rather than having a special election. That appointed district attorney would then serve until the next general election in 2026. Next slide, please. We also would be remiss if we didn't point out that several years after having approved a youth vote that authorized 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in school board elections, this is finally going to be implemented. So any 16 or 17-year-old residing in Oakland who previously pre-registered to vote will automatically be pre-registered to vote as a youth voter in school board elections. Next slide, please. In the Oakland elections, as you all probably know, we used ranked choice voting. And here you see a ranked choice voting ballot. It's going to list all the candidates for a certain office. And you can vote for up to 5 of them. All right? But you don't have to vote for any more than 1. So how should you decide what to do? Given that you have those options. We suggest you vote for your favorite candidate, the one you like the most, the one in whom you repose the greatest confidence under your first choice. Then you ask yourself, who else among those running, in whom do I have confidence that they could carry out the duties of this office in ways that I would appreciate and approve of? Continue on in that fashion as far as you can go with candidates that you feel some confidence in. But stop when you get to the end of that list. And so if there's no one else you can support with any enthusiasm and you've put your 3 or 2 or 4 folks down, you stop there and leave your remaining choice or choices blank. Okay? The important reminders on this is that you want to vote for only 1 person in each column. It's okay to vote for less than 5, and it does not help you to vote for a person more than once. All right, so it might seem like a good idea, but it doesn't work. And don't vote for anyone that you really do not want to be elected. Okay, next slide. This was a lot of information in a short period of time. We consider it like your first pass at the material. So know that you can go to our website and you can find one-pagers that explain this, summarize this stuff. They'll be much more comprehensible to you, having listened to this, and remind you of a lot of the arguments that have been brought up and the particular details of each measure. There's also a short video on each of these measures. And there's linkages to the state measures as well. Last slide. Thank you very much for spending a beautiful Saturday afternoon with us. We are celebrating our centennial this year, 100 years of championing democracy right here in Oakland. Please visit our website for more voting resources and spread the word. Vote 411, you can find links to that as well on our website, is a national platform that we use and encourage people to use. If you enter your address there, you will see exactly what's going to appear on your ballot. So that's a quick way to find out whether or not you're voting on that fire measure, for example. Okay? And there's a lot of information about the measures and the candidates there as well. Finally, consider becoming a member. We offer a sliding scale fee to support all budgets, and it is a validation of the work that we do if you would consider joining in it with us. Thanks very much. And the house is open for questions. Thank you.
And feel free to ask your questions from there, and then we'll just, again, reiterate it. And just
Oh, yes.
recording.
Who generally approves the bond requests? Have I captured the question there? Okay, great. Thank you for that question. So the beginning of the process is at the state level, and that's where this measure requires that they seek community input. Because you should know that in no case is there enough money, no matter all the bond measures passing, to cover all the needs that various school districts have across the state. So each school district has to prioritize its requests. That prioritization is going to take place at the local level through your local school board, right? And your local school administration. So when you're asking, they're going to gather the information on their facilities, on different things. We've heard a lot of, for example, about lead in water. These kinds of things are going to be discussed and prioritized at the local level through the school district. And then they will submit their applications according to the state rules, how many they can submit and this type of thing. And I don't know all the strategies, like do you submit some that are smaller and some that are larger and some that need to be funded immediately and some that are longer term. I'm not sure with that degree of detail, but it is basically the local school district who does the prioritization. Then there's another whole process that happens at the state level when they receive these applications from the school districts across the state. And then they have to look statewide to see where the greatest needs are, where these funds have gone recently, and try and achieve some kind of equity and response to urgency across the state. So there's kind of two levels of where this happens. I can't go farther into the weeds than that. Is that helpful at all? I think it's not a one-pointed system, but I do not know definitively. I'm sure the superintendent of schools would be involved in the process. So would responses from each school and the gathering of information through the district from each school.
You also want to talk about matching local funds?
Yes, and the idea is that you're getting from the state funds to match that what you're going to be able to put up, right? So that's your request. We've gotten authority to prioritize it this way and to raise this much in local bonds. Will you match us in this amount for this purpose? Yes, thank you. Appreciate it. So that question, if I recall correctly, was it the superintendent of schools that's making the decision? And that's why I was saying I think it's a little bit more disparate throughout the system to cull the information and make the final decision.
So the question is, who currently sets the minimum wage for the state? And it depends, because it could be through the lawmakers. So, for example, currently for fast food workers, the $20, and also for healthcare workers, those were both law from the state legislature. The proposition, but it could also be set by propositions. So the $16 goes back to, I'm forgetting which proposition. Again, the $16 goes back to a certain proposition, and it's come sort of through cost of living adjustments to $16 right now. So it depends, yeah. Yeah, sure.
Don't be shy. It can't have been all that clear. Yes, the question is confusion about 34.
Yeah.
Which one's 34?
It's
I think of them as subject matter, not as numbers at this point. So
let's go back.
So this is the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, I think?
Yeah.
So 33 was rent control, right? We're clear about that? Third time around, we're starting to get with it, right? All right. So we know what is wanted on the rent control front. And it has not succeeded. The AIDS Healthcare Foundation is now here for the third time to ask us to reconsider that. Maybe it will succeed this time, but it has not previously. So those people and organizations, the apartment associations, the apartment that's in our money slide there, who are opposing the rent control, have to spend a lot of money each time to oppose these repeated ballot measures. So they're trying to put an end to that dilemma for themselves. And every time it's the AIDS Healthcare Foundation that is the one putting the money up for the rent control measure. So they crafted 34 to make it virtually impossible for the Healthcare Foundation to use its resources for this purpose, right? Their resources that they're using, certainly in large part, this is a big organization, so they buy these retail drugs for their clients at a reduced price, but sell them at retail. They generate a great deal of profit. Under the current situation, they have some leeway to spend that profit on direct patient care or on the apartment buildings they run or on bringing measures to the ballot. If this 34 passes, they're going to lose that discretion because it's going to require them to spend 98% of these profits on direct patient care. And putting a measure on the ballot is not going to come under direct patient care. So it's a little dance between these two groups that are funding this. You haven't seen this part of it before. Previously, the property organizations who oppose rent control have simply opposed the rent control measure. Here they're trying to take it a step farther and say, let's make this the end of the road so that the AIDS Healthcare Foundation will not be able, should they lose this time around, again, bring a measure of this sort to the ballot. Does that help? Yes. Yes. And, you know, it's very unusual to see an initiative that is this pointed towards a particular organization. So it is a little bit confounding. And it is one of the reasons that some people oppose it, because they don't think you should use the initiative process that way. But so it's not surprising that it's a bit confusing. I hope that helps make it a little bit clearer. I think I understand your question. I was just going to say thank you for that. No, so I think, correct me, I want to see if I've got your question correctly. This measure came, the rent control measure came in 2018, and it came in 2020. Are you asking whether they came closer to passage in 2018 and then closer in 2020? Are they making progress in moving towards getting the 50% vote? Right. So, okay, you all understand the question now that this is the 2018, 2020, now 2024. In 2020, did they get closer to the goal of eliminating Costa-Hawkins and state control over rent control in a way that's giving the proponents hope that it will pass this time around? That's an excellent question, and I don't know the answer to it. It's a very yeah, it's definitely has that flavor of an initiative that represents a contest between two strong interest groups. Do you remember dialysis? So I'm just going to call that right, because it was another instance where we saw the issue repeatedly, and we saw the same institutions and people on the same sides repeatedly. And this is the kind of thing that comes through the initiative process. And I think it bedevils many voters, myself included, because these are complex policy questions. And in this one in particular, it's interesting because whatever you think of rent control, we have the situation that if Costa-Hawkins is rolled back, we don't actually know what the consequences would be because we don't know what local governments will do. So there's all sorts of contentions out there that, you know, if this kind of rent control is passed at the local level, this is the consequence. So it makes it a peculiarly difficult one to vote on. Yeah. 40.6% for rent control in 2018.
Yeah. Then in 2020, it was now called Proposition 21, and it was 40.15%. So it just went down slightly.
So it went down slightly in 2020,
yeah,
but hundredths of a percent. So it was the public stayed pretty constant in their evaluation of it, between 40 and 41% for it, which was obviously not enough to qualify because you need more than 50%. Oh, I don't purport to explain it, but just, factually. Yeah, right. We shall see. It's on the ballot. Yes, and we just hope you feel more empowered to make your own decisions, knowing the history and kind of the issues that are at stake. And thank you, Cynthia, for looking that up. Louise.
Yeah. So the question is around Prop 36 and the effect of having this treatment mandated felony, and whether there's any funding available actually to support that. And that's actually one of the issues, if you will, with the measure, that the opponents point out that there isn't additional funding. Many districts, jurisdictions are struggling to support just treatment in general. And now you have an initiative that's mandating this, if you will, with no money to support it. Yeah, if I can just paraphrase this. So first off, this was a plug from our audience for Vote 411. So thank you for that. You can go to Vote 411. You can put in your address, and it will actually spit out your ballot. I may punt this to Fiona or Louise. Our Vote 411 is a national platform. Not all states have propositions, so that's a lovely California feature. So our platform is geared, Vote for One was geared towards candidates. So there might be some awkwardness in the phrasing when it comes to a measure. And that, I think, is what you are seeing. Fiona, could you come up to the mic then just make it easier? Sorry.
So what happens with the measure is, as you said, ma'am, that there's no candidate, right? So all the content for the measure is in that very first box, and you often have to scroll through it. And so if you click on yes or no, there's no more information. That part isn't. And so, like Anna was saying, that since other states don't do what California does, that it has, the interface wasn't built for measures. So they've made it sort of work for the measures, but all the content is in the block itself. So you will see links to our PDFs about the measures, to our videos, and you will see, against, and then a rebuttal to the against, and you'll see the for and rebuttal to the for. And having sort of typed it all in myself for MM, I know it's there, and I know that it is there for NN and OO as well. The interface certainly has some issues, but I think there's a lot of great content there with you. So I just hope that everyone sort of takes that extra time to read through it, and it is some scrolling you need to do. But thank you so much for the Vote 411 plug.
And also, can't we also say that if you're interested, because I think one point of interest for our questioner is, how do you find out whether the candidates that you're considering, how they stand on these? So you always have their websites, and they also have the opportunity to input information on 411. And exactly. So going specifically to the candidate's information, you might see a mention of it if it's something they're particularly a proponent of.
And especially on their website. Like
especially, and if you don't see it on 411, then go to their website and see, because they'll usually often put the measures that they're in favor of. So, yeah, it's work. Democracy is work.
It's a great tool.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question.
Yeah.
So what better way to end this by saying democracy is work? Thank you so much.
Not a spectator sport. Thank you.